my God. Good morning, everybody.
Hey, Babz, how are
Jeff
you?
Grant. I'm
Hey.
Babz Rawls-Ivy.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
How are you? And this is year 4?
This is our 4th season, Babz. Can you
Oh
imagine?
my God. Criminal Justice Insider is 4?
Yeah. No, we're 3, but this is our 4th. This is our 4th season.
Oh my God.
Do you remember who our first guest was?
No.
Robin Porter.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've been through 3 corrections commissioners during the tenure of this show.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Oh, and this little show has had such great impact. Thank you, Jeff, for making this show what it is. Really.
No, Babz. Are you
no,
kidding?
seriously, your tenacity and your getting these amazing guests has really what made this show amazing. I listen. I got to give credit where credit is due. So
for me to get credit from you, Babz, is really something.
That's not true. Oh my God! Did you just throw me under the
bus? I know. So Babz, how was your summer?
My summer was good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good summer. I mean, not like last summer or summers before.
Yeah.
I think the pandemic has really. I mean, it has changed everybody's lives. I mean, lives, and I want to say, for the most part, that people got to think about things in ways that they never thought they would because of this pandemic, and people got to sort of think about their relationships, whether it's family or love relationships or work relationships or political relationships. Everybody got to think about all their relationships differently because of this. Some for good, some for bad. And but it made everybody think about this thing differently, about their lives differently. So,
Yeah.
Here we are.
So the show is streaming right now on Facebook Live.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just put it up on the Criminal Justice Insider page, and I'll put it on yours right now too, Babz, if you want.
Yes, please. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, and it will become a podcast and archived on SoundCloud and I think iTunes.
Mm-hmm.
And this show is still happily sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Yeah, we are very, very grateful to them. I mean, just marvelous folks who even in this pandemic and times of social unrest have probably doubled down on their commitment to the Greater New Haven area, and they're doing wonderful things. And so we thank them for their sponsorship of us, and we just always want to do right by them. So that's a wonderful thing.
So today we have our friend, Mike Lawler from the University of New Haven, returning to bring us up to date on the state of criminal justice here in Connecticut and around the country. I think you've probably been the guest we've had most on. Do you think? We're going to start doing like the late night shows. Like how many times have people done Saturday Night Live? How many times people have done like Jimmy Kimmel? So how many times have you?
No, we had Mike on. Mike by himself. Then Mike came on our wrap show, our wrap-up show in June. So this is his 3rd time on the show.
I don't think we've ever had anybody 3 times. So.
He's it.
So Mike,
I've been on a few times before that, actually.
Yes,
that might be.
Yeah.
So you're the one to beat, Mike Lawler.
This is the place to be. You know what I'm saying?
Although I saw your Facebook post telling people, well, if you're bored, you have to be bored to watch that show.
Bored to watch me, not you guys.
No, you're exciting. No, you have the right information for us. So how's it going? How are you?
I'm doing awesome. We're back teaching in person at the University of New Haven, although we have these awesome. Yeah, but the protocols they have are very impressive. We all wear masks. We've all been tested. We have this app that we have to show green every time we walk into a room, as do all our students. And
wow. And
they split the classes in half. So half the kids come one day, the other half come the other day. So we only have like 9 or 10 students in a classroom at a time. So and the results speak for themselves. Unlike some of these other places around the country, there's been almost no positive among students, none, and not only a handful elsewhere in the university. So we're very happy so far, so good.
Did you all bring all your students back?
Everybody wanted to come back. Yeah, our dorms are full. You know, they're spaced out more than they would normally be. But yeah, everybody's back on campus, and we actually had more freshmen this year than any year in the history of our university, which is now this is our 100th year. So it's
wow,
it's a great vote of confidence in our university. And if you haven't been to our campus lately, it's amazing.
I've been there a couple of times recently. Yeah. Yes, it is.
But they just finished them. You were there last year. You spoke on a panel with me, Babz, and but they just finished our newest building. It's very, very impressive. I only wish, you know, during the summer, during our recruiting time, more families could have gone inside the buildings to check them out. But next year, I'm sure we'll have a bumper crop of new students.
So there's a lot of criminal justice growth at University of New Haven too, Mike. There's a Tau Youth Justice Institute.
Yes.
And so what's going on over there in terms of the social justice and criminal justice in general?
Well, you know, as you just pointed out, I mean, the criminal justice major is by far the largest on our campus, and our overall school, the Lee College, which consists of like forensic sciences and national security studies, and you can even major in EMT. So it's a very diversified group of public safety oriented people. And we actually have some great new faculty. I mean, I think Daniela Cooper, has she been on your show yet?
Yeah, she has.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you know Daniela? You know,
yes.
Dr. Boyd, Lorenzo Boyd. Have you bumped?
I've had him on my show. Yes.
Lorenzo is awesome, and but they brought some new perspective to our university. You know, Daniela, Dr. Cooper is more involved at the Tau Youth Justice Institute. Lorenzo is very involved in police training, and he heads up the Center for Advanced Police Training on our campus. And I work with both of them on those projects, and it's great, you know. And I think, you know, as you pointed out a few minutes ago, a lot of things are changing in criminal justice world, including policing. And I think all the reforms that are being enacted around the country, I mean, I think we're just at the beginning of that process, but still at the end of the day, I think training for police, the kinds of jobs we expect them to do are going to change a lot. I think there's going to be a new cadre of, you know, kind of like EMTs were added to fire departments, right? I mean, we're all accustomed to that now, but it used to be firefighters were just firefighters. Now they have all these specializations. I think you're going to see that within police departments as well. You know, the trained professionals who don't carry a gun, don't wear a badge, but respond to the more routine incidents. For example, people who have serious mental illness or homelessness, substance abuse, that kind of thing. You can definitely see things moving in that direction. So we're hoping to be right at the center of it, and I'm very excited about that.
That's a good point that you make, Mike, because, you know, all the protests around defund the police departments is not saying getting rid of police officers on the street. What they're suggesting is reallocation of resources to bring in people that can do the work that police officers are not trained to do, particularly when you have a mental health issue or some other crises that's not related to what police officers should be spending their time on. But if police officers can come into a department, or departments are willing to sort of say, we need to change what we desire or need in police officers. Like, so now you may have a psychologist as a police officer, or a nurse as a police officer, or you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
So that you still have a police officer that is trained in all the things that police officers ought to be trained in, but they have this added layer of another skill set, so that we don't have what we just saw with police officers arriving on scenes and putting bags over mentally ill people and killing them. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they don't have the skills to deal with that.
Well, I take it a step farther, actually, because I think we actually expect too much of our police officers today. We expect them to handle too many different types of situations, and a lot of it they're not really trained for. And so I think if we could have more specialization within police and less emphasis on this is what you get in the police academies even today. It's just a very sort of military style training. But what gets lost is this ability to deal with people who are experiencing great trauma in their lives. And it's not to say that there aren't dangerous situations, right? And that require trained public safety officers with weapons and handcuffs, et cetera. But if you just look at the data from the 911 calls into the New Haven Police Department or any police department, what you'll see is a very small percentage of the calls that come in, and a very small percentage of the work a police officer does during the course of a day involves anything close to a threat to public safety. So like a routine motor vehicle accident, who's going to write the police report? Who's going to process a burglary scene? I mean, elsewhere in the country, there's specialized people who do that. They're not sworn police officers that do that kind of thing. And so I think, and you see the beginnings of this being discussed by the New Haven Police Department and by the chief, and you see this elsewhere in the country. There was a story, I put it on Facebook a month or so ago in Kentucky. This police department hired a bunch of what they called social workers to augment what the police officers do. And as a result, crime went down. The overtime went way down.
Really?
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing I think that the future holds for policing, because obviously a bunch of stuff is going to change. And my prediction is it ends up more or less like what I'm describing.
So, Mike, haven't we come around to justice reinvestment in a very unexpected way? I mean, for years it was a kind of an ebb and flow of press, of like a full court press on lobbying to a legislature, and either they got it or they didn't. And then in the last bunch of years, we've seen changes because of the fiscal crisis. Then we've seen changes now because of the grassroots swelling up of demand for change. And it feels like we're actually coming to a place that's more enlightened, maybe, and finally able to put the resources where a lot of us thought they should have been to begin with.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And the crisis we're going through now related to COVID has presented an extraordinary, unprecedented opportunity to, I guess you could say, right size the criminal justice system. You know, our prison population is at a 31-year low. And I mean, you know, I'm obsessed with these things if you look at my Twitter feed, but the point is, in the last 4 months, our prison population has shrunk by almost 4,000 inmates. And we're down to 9,500 inmates. And at one point we were at almost 20,000, right? And this is happening because of the COVID crisis. But it's not because more people are being released from prison. Actually, fewer are being released. What's happening is there's fewer and fewer coming in the front door. And that's because fewer and fewer people are being arrested. And that's not because police are ignoring crime, because we also keep track of data about reported crime. And reported crime, believe it or not, is down significantly nationwide, including here in Connecticut, including here in New Haven, during the COVID crisis. And now the only thing that's up, and it's serious, are shootings and homicides. Yeah. Those are definitely up. But everything else, violent crime and property crime, is down significantly. And because fewer people are committing crimes, fewer people are being arrested, fewer people are ending up in prison. And so now we have an opportunity to figure out, is this the right size for our Department of Corrections? You know, and you heard the new commissioner, when he was introduced this week, say that, you know, he's going to be closing prisons as soon as COVID is over. I mean, they need the space to spread people out at the moment within the facilities. But once this is behind us, I would imagine 2 or 3 prisons are going to close on top of the ones that have already closed. And so you asked about justice reinvestment. The concept there is, if your goal is reducing crime, and if there are ways to reduce crime by investing in certain things, you know, less crime means fewer people are going to be incarcerated, and that's going to be a saving. So take some of that savings and reinvest it in the kinds of things that are getting you that outcome that you want, which is less crime. And I think focusing on persons with mental illness, homelessness, substance abuse, young kids who are dealing with trauma because of their upbringing. Those are the kinds of things that if you can get a handle on that, there's going to be a lot less crime. And we can prove that because here in Connecticut, that's exactly what's been going on for a little bit more than a decade. And our crime is at historic lows right now. So more investment in those things, and we definitely need more investment in those things, will reduce crime and will shrink the footprint of what we have traditionally considered to be the criminal justice system. Going to expand mental health care. It's going to expand housing opportunities for people who have not had that opportunity in the past. It's going to expand options for substance abuse and reduce the number of overdoses. These are the kinds of things, I mean, these are the goals you want to achieve, right? Mm-hmm. Not just punishing people. Yeah. Why punish people if you don't get some outcome in return, right? And that's been our goal.
So what about the, Connecticut just got through the legislation, the Police Accountability Act, right? Yep. And police officers, police unions that represent police officers pushed back on that mightily hard and felt very attacked and maligned by this. And I, for one, couldn't figure it out because I went through the act, and we've had I've had Gary Winfield on my morning show, my daily morning show, talking about that. And from where I could see and understand that the Police Accountability Act really was, to me, looked like it was taking care of police officers in their day-to-day doing of their job. Wanting to put in things like checking on their mental health, when there's a shooting, follow up. There was a lot of good things in there, and I do think that is the way forward. But police officers really took great offense at that. So where do you lean on that, and where should we see the tension, and help us understand why the tension and why police officers feel that way, if you could?
Yeah, well, I'm not a psychologist, right? But the pushback from some, and definitely not all, some law enforcement organizations is really unfortunate. As you point out, if you actually read the bill, it is relatively mild, and it actually contains a lot of helpful resources for police, and it will help in the future do a better job of weeding out the bad apples that have been described even by President Trump, right? I mean, just the other day, he was talking about an officer choking, meaning panicking under pressure. I mean, that's his explanation of what happened in Minneapolis and in Wisconsin, right?
You mean with the knee on the neck?
Yeah, that's what, I mean, that's what he
said, choke, right? Yeah, that's panicking.
I think that was the missed putt.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, the point is, like, he's not even he, right, is throwing these police officers under the bus, right? These individuals in these extreme situations. But I think we can all agree, and I think if you talk to any police officer, we agree, like, they know there are bad apples on their police department.
Yeah, sure.
And they know that those people, in effect, ruin it for everybody else. I was a legislator for a long time, and because of things that John Rowland did, I had to pay the consequences in all these layers of oversight and ethics reporting and all this kind of stuff. But, that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what happens. But I think some of the unions involved here are definitely overplaying their hand. I mean, I don't know if you read about the incident involving Senator Bob Duff down in Norwalk, where he went at the invitation of the police union to come to the police department to meet with them. And he basically, I mean, he describes it himself, but among other things, they spit at him and essentially threatened him and told him he should leave the building for his own safety in the police department, right? And you just saw the other day the state police union voted apparently overwhelmingly no confidence in the governor, the commissioner, and the colonel of the state police. Like, what gain comes from this? This seems like, and I've seen this before, this all or nothing strategy. The only downside with that is it's always successful. You either get all or nothing. And there's no question that after the elections next spring, when the Connecticut legislature is back in session, when the Congress is in its post-election mode, and hopefully there'll be a new president, there's going to be another much more comprehensive round of police reform legislation and money following it, especially from the federal level, coming down to the states. And so this is a time to engage. If you're the police, in the police unions, you want to be at that table, and you want to acknowledge that there are problems that need to be addressed. And if you just act like there's no problem and nothing is necessary to do here, things are going to happen to you without your involvement. I saw this once before. I don't know, I think I'm older than everybody, but in the 1990s, this is how the Connecticut county sheriffs behaved when there was reforms proposal kicking around at the legislature. They tried to block everything, and at the end of the day, they were eliminated altogether. The state constitution was amended, and poof, they were gone. And that's what happens, right? So I hope they come around to their senses and engage constructively in these discussions, acknowledging that there needs to be change. And there's a lot that can be done to help them.
Mike, isn't there always a lag? I mean, there's some form of change. Maybe it's legislative, maybe it's by executive order, but then there's a lag of people who either get on board or accept or understand that there's a new order of doing things. One of the things that I'm concerned about, having been involved in community corrections for so long in Connecticut, is that we have fewer people in prison, so there may be greater need for community support and for nonprofit support, but maybe there's a lag in the money getting from the savings in one place to them, or maybe there's a whole new culture. How is our safety net doing right now? Is it in shreds? Is it strong? Is it in a place in between where they're just going to have to wait for everything to catch up?
Well, it's less than adequate, that's for sure. And I think, as is the case with all state and local publicly financed services, I mean, they've been living on a shoestring, especially the nonprofits, the people who provide, using mostly public money to provide services in the community. It's a real struggle, right? But the good news is that because we've been able to evaluate the effectiveness of all these different things, I think we can pretty accurately identify the programs that are extremely effective. And by the same token, there's some initiatives that are not, they're not data driven. Let's just put it that way. And so I think we're more likely to invest in services that are very effective in the future. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I think generally speaking, halfway houses are not very effective. These are places that reentering citizens typically spend 6 months after they leave prison.
So, Mike Waller, why aren't they effective? Because on paper and thinking, sounds like a good idea. You come out of prison, you go to a halfway house, you get some supportive service. Well, the idea is get some supportive services, you get reacclimated to the community before actually jumping fully back into the community. Where's the disconnect? Where's the breakdown?
Well, a lot of this has to do with policy, right? And so in theory, a halfway house is a perfectly logical concept, right? But the way it has operated traditionally in Connecticut and pretty much everywhere else is not a great way to operate these things. So, for example, right, it's not unusual that returning citizens are required to spend 6 months. I don't know where that number came from, but 6 months in a halfway house. And in the halfway houses, there's plenty of documentation around this. Some are run better than others, but it turns out that there's access to drugs and alcohol and bad influences, and sometimes people struggling to succeed are being pulled down by their roommates, in effect, right? So it's a concentration of people, not all of whom are equally motivated to succeed, and having 50, 60, 70 people together in a facility does not seem like such a great idea. On top of that, in Connecticut, we're unique. We have this status called special parole. And without going into a lot of boring detail, there's people who are sentenced in court to be on special parole, sometimes for more than a decade. And the way the rules work at the moment is if you don't have a residence that's approved by your parole officer, you have to live in like a halfway house. So we have people staying in halfway houses, not for 6 months, but for years because
oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Yes. And they take up a lot of the beds, which means that people coming out of prison can't get into a bed. It's like this vicious cycle that really makes no sense. And it's only when you see the whole system, every aspect of the system, you can see these disconnects. So I think, the better alternative is some type of supportive housing that doesn't rely on sort of congregate housing, like a bunch of people together. And I'm on the board of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. I don't know if you're familiar.
I know it.
Yeah, we love that organization.
But their whole thing, their main focus is not congregate housing. It's not homeless shelters. It's supportive, independent housing where you're not term limited in the amount of time you can stay there, because you can demonstrate this is very successful in, among other things, reducing crime, reducing recidivism, but also getting people to get their lives back together, to deal with their substance abuse situation, to deal with their mental health situation, get a job and live independently. And if you want to achieve that goal, which is, I think, the right goal, there are more effective ways to do it. So the halfway house thing makes perfect sense on paper, but the way and this in Pennsylvania did an elaborate study, and they showed that people ended up in a halfway house had a greater rate of recidivism.
Yeah.
And people didn't. So it's stuff like this. And it's not a criticism. It's just like, okay, now we have a lot more information. We can make more informed policy decisions. But all these decisions are going to rely on reallocating resources into other areas. So like halfway house budget is mainly paid for out of the Department of Correction. Maybe that same exact money could be allocated by giving it to the housing, all the groups that work with the Connecticut Coalition and Homeless, I mean, and former Commissioner Semple, and I, we were very close at the time, and even until today, he was willing to make that trade.
Can you imagine
give up money in his budget?
A simple Lawler governor, lieutenant governor ticket? Just saying.
Yeah, no, I'm done with elected politics. I've lost my ability to suffer fools gladly, which is important skill set in.
Me too, Mike. Me too.
Mike, my experience is obviously anecdotal when it comes to living in a halfway house. But when I got out of federal prison, I went to Watkinson House in Hartford, which is has federal beds and has state beds. So we became integrated between those two populations.
I didn't know they could mix housing like that.
Jeff. Yeah, it's by the bed. It's by whoever pays for the bed.
We've got federal inmates in our prison system too, so we mix them all over the place.
So I got picked up in Pennsylvania, driven to Watkinson House. I get to Watkinson House. They do the intake. They take me up to the room, and I'm sitting in the room, and there's four beds there, 2 bunk beds in the room, and I'm all alone in the room because I can't leave the room when you first get to halfway house. You're stuck in the halfway house for a while. So the first roommate comes in, and he's high. And then the other 2 roommates come in, and they've been together for a while, and the 3 of them pull out a pint, and they're drinking. And I'm 5 years sober at that point.
Yep.
And they asked me if I want to drink. I haven't even seen alcohol in 5 years. And I said, no, I don't drink. I'm going to go get my 5-year coin in recovery in a couple of days. And then their first reaction is, they said to me, "Are you a cop?"
Yeah, there you go.
Whoa.
That's what they said. "Are you a cop?" Because I wasn't willing to drink with them.
Yeah.
And I didn't need any, trouble in halfway house. I just come from prison,
So you're a person with lived experience, right?
Yeah.
They call that, but people can hear me saying what I was saying a few minutes ago and say, well, how does he really know? But Jeff, you can share these stories. And I think, to me, the most effective type of advocacy is people with lived experience doing it, telling their personal stories. And I give you a lot of credit for telling yours. And we see with the American Civil Liberties Union in Connecticut, they have The advocates there are all persons with lived experience who are telling their personal stories and encouraging other people to do it, because that's how people learn about this stuff. And to say, and you just told an experience, but I think it also helps people understand that we are talking about human beings, and okay, people made mistakes in their lives, no question. Sometimes it was intentional, sometimes it was accidental, but still, these are humans. And if our goal is to figure out how to help these individuals succeed going forward so that we have less crime and more public safety, right, among other things, we need to listen to these stories and fix what's broken. And that's not easy to do, but it's easier to ignore if in your mind these are animals, which I frequently hear people refer to.
Oh, I hear it all the time.
Yeah, and especially people in the criminal, in the criminal justice profession.
Yeah.
And if you dehumanize people like this, it's easy to just not even focus on any of the things that you and I are now discussing, right? So I think that changing that mindset is part of the challenge here.
What I find odd these days, Mike Lawler, is that on any given day, people like to remind me that I've committed a crime. But there are more instances I'm starting to see now that people don't know that I went to prison, and then they have these conversations as if I'm going to join in with them, calling people animals, and I have to remind people, I went to federal prison too, and then they're like, oh, I don't mean you. Well, who do you mean? Like, who do you mean, really? Because some of the best people I've ever met in my life have been some of the women I've served with. So who do you mean when you talk about animals? These are mothers and daughters and sisters and aunts who committed a crime and who are serving their time. So why are you want to classify them as animals? So it's that change.
Well, Babz, can I just say, I can relate to that, but in a different context. As you probably, my husband, David, he refers to me as the straightest acting gay guy he's ever met. And for a long time, I mean, I was in a lot of conversations with people who, wouldn't really necessarily
didn't know you were gay.
Yeah, and the kind of stuff they said, like people let their guard down, right? And I think it's, on the gay topic, on the marriage equality topic, people change their minds once they could say, well, I guess I know some gay people and they seem kind of normal, right? And like, all right, so what's the big deal? And
normal.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's what people, just as boring as everybody else, I got a house and a kid and a dog, right?
That's the truth.
So anyways, but that's how you change people's minds, right? And it worked very quickly in the marriage equality topic. It's a little bit more challenging in the criminal justice reform area, but still, it's working. I mean, if you compared what's going on now to what was going on 10, 15, 30 years ago, I mean, look at the epiphany that Joe Biden has had, for example. I voted all the same crap in the 80s and 90s as Joe Biden, voted for, but like people have seen the unintended consequences of these policies and are committed to fixing them. And I think that's, that's part of why I get so worked up on this topic.
So Mike, one of the hallmarks or the low marks of this pandemic is that people are stuck inside with each other. And so we're reading a lot about increases in domestic violence, which was already a huge topic.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of things that are not even rising to it might be criminal behavior, but they're not getting caught because everyone's kind of insulated in their own houses. But from a preventative diversion kind of standpoint, I mean, where are we? I know that the DOC or maybe a CSSD were paying for groups that people had to attend, that were court mandated, but now they can't attend these groups in person. So what's the substitute been, and what's going on out there in terms of actually trying to help people who are in urgent need on that day?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're talking about like acute care kind of situations, that's, people end up in the emergency room, right? Mm. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that would be normal that's not happening. And in a way, it's an interesting experiment. Like if you took away a lot of this stuff, what happens. And I think what we're finding out is a lot of the stuff that was happening routinely wasn't necessarily helping at all. I mean, another recent example, right? Connecticut closed its one and only juvenile prison. Right. So we've got nothing. Has the number of young people getting arrested and committing crimes gone up? Nope. It's gone way down. In fact, you know, I might have mentioned this once before in an earlier show, but if you look at, you know, okay, the overall prison population is shrinking a lot, right? That's for sure. Mm-hmm. But almost all of the reduction in population has been among the youngest, meaning like under age 25 people. So that group, you know, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, there's about 70% fewer in prison today than was the case 10 or 11 years ago. I mean, that's huge. And the number of people over 40 is actually going up a little bit, right? So if it was true that by not having a prison available for juveniles that you're putting them on a trajectory to a life of crime and all kinds of mayhem, well, it's been disproven by the Connecticut experiment. And so I'm just saying, like, maybe it turns out that we don't need to do a lot of this stuff that we have been doing. And, you know, a lot of these things sound great on paper, but they don't necessarily get the outcomes you want. It's kind of like the DARE program, you know. I mean, this is notorious, right? It sounds great. All the parents, the teachers, the police love it, but all the evidence indicates either it makes no difference at all, or the kids that go through it are more likely to experiment with drugs. So, I mean, it's that kind of thing that I think is being reconsidered now. And so maybe the absence of all of these various, because don't forget, Jeff, the group meetings you're talking about are basically supervised by law enforcement officers, probation officers. And I take it, Babz, you were on some kind of community release too after you were no longer incarcerated. It's easy to screw up when people are watching you like that, and when there's all these conditions on you. And you know, I don't think I could be successful on probation for a year with all the rules that go.
I don't feel like it was designed for you to be successful. So many ways. I think there's some document that came out. There was like, I don't know, like 50,000 ways that you can break probation and parole just by like everyday course of your day doing normal things. Mm-hmm. You know, it was just treacherous.
So one guy, there's this very well-known academic guy who does a lot of training, and he's got this great expression. It may not even be original to him, but I think it's really true. He says, you know, think of what a referee does in a sporting contest, right? Like a football referee. He calls penalties, or a baseball umpire calls balls and strikes. That's all they do. You break the rules, there's a penalty. And he said, but a coach is very different. A coach says, okay, you made this mistake. Here's how to fix it and make sure it does, you know. And he said, the traditional mentality of probation and parole officers has been that of a referee. And the mentality should be that of a coach, right?
I feel that way too, Mike Lawler. I really do.
You should be evaluated by how successful your probationers or parolees are, not how many you violate. And I think in the past, you know, the expression was trail them, nail them, and jail them. You know, that was the sort of mantra of some parole and probation officers. And that's the exact opposite of what we want. And if the people you are supervising or coaching, let's say, keep getting arrested, then you are a failure. That's your fault, right? And especially if you stand out from the crowd of your colleagues. And now we have the ability to track this kind of stuff. You know, just the same way we do police officers who are off the charts in terms of what we call racial profiling data. You know, there are some individual officers that you can really see are outliers, and now you know there's a problem. And so this sort of data-driven stuff is changing the way the criminal justice system works. And we're just at the very beginning of this sort of new era. And I think it's going to work out great.
I like the idea of the data. I think the problem is politicians who don't absorb the data, or who refute the data, or a president who does not look at data and, you know, and says opposite of the data. And the people that follow that thinking won't see the data and won't change their hearts and minds around what they hear versus what they see. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, I definitely do.
That's quite challenging to me. Like, how do we? It just makes change so much slower and difficult.
People make fun of me because, like, for a long time now, I keep saying, like, crime is down for what it's worth, and they think it's funny, like, well, Michael Lawless is crime. Well, it actually is, and the reason I keep saying it is because people just don't believe it, and it's actually true. And so there's a candidate for the state legislature where I live here in Morse Cove, and she's a Republican, needless to say, and she put something on her Facebook page that says, "Oh, crime is way up in New Haven because of whatever."
What?
And that's what she said. And I said, well, I didn't even argue with her. I just said, well, here's a link to the New Haven Police Department CompStat page with all the data for the last week compared to the previous month, compared to the previous year to date, all this stuff. And every category is down significantly except for murders and shootings, right? Okay. So, but in violent crime is actually way down in New Haven compared to last year. Shootings are up, but everything else is down. So, like, don't say crime is up. Violent crime is, it's get it right. And the data are there to be found. And if you refuse to even look at it or accept it, and then she started arguing, like, it's up. I said, no, it's down. I mean, this is the reported crime. This is the police department's numbers. Like, I'm not making these up. Anyway, but it is important for people to understand that. And I think what a lot of people can't acknowledge, including a lot of people who work in the criminal justice field, is that the goal is less crime. And if there's more crime, you're doing something wrong. If there's less crime, you're doing something right, and figure out what those right things are and do more of that. And my experience, they're talking about police or prosecutors or corrections or anything, that they get very threatened when you start saying, we're going to measure you by the outcome that matters most, how much crime is going on.
Yeah.
And in a way, my impression is some, not all, but some police seem to like the idea that crime is going up because somehow they feel that makes their role more important, or they should get more resources.
Sure, of course.
And they feel
that's what I thought I always felt that was the heart of this kind of thinking, that there's a fear of being displaced or not valued in some kind of way,
Yep.
But Michael, also some of the data, it feels like there's a crisis of public relations, like people at the top, and I'm talking about the governor, for example. And this is not really a political comment about Democrat, Republican, anything like that. But in terms of doing a job with a pandemic and our numbers coming down and everything, and seeing the daily talks that the governor gives, to me, this is like the most rational thing I've ever seen from a business perspective. Someone who's just there and exhibiting leadership from this, we're just trying to do the best we can. This is what we're doing, and it's absolutely transparent, and we're going to get some stuff wrong. And again, it's not a political thing. But at the same time, there were decisions made to not release people from prisons because of COVID-19. However, our prison population is going down dramatically. So people aren't putting all of that together into something cohesive. And so everybody who has, all the stakeholders who have a stake in the game, are kind of going into their corners. And to me, it doesn't compute. Like, all right, prison population's going down. We seem to be doing a good job with COVID. All right, what's really going on in terms of the decision-making about not releasing people from prison due to COVID?
Mm-hmm. And so a couple of things. First of all, let me start by saying, in the early stages of this pandemic, if the decision had been made to try and release a lot more people who could have been safely released, there would be a lot fewer people in prison today, right? But as it turns out, a lot of people did get the benefit of what you might refer to as an early release. but we're talking about like a month or two earlier than they would normally be released. And these like reentry furloughs and stuff like that, right? So it's not as though nothing happened. It's not as though that the COVID situation wasn't a factor in who was getting released and when. I mean, it was. I think this happened at a very sort of granular level in a way that is way too complicated to even explain. And I think for reasons which are understandable to me as someone who had to run for office a bunch of times, I think politicians are reluctant to say that there's actually a policy to push people out the door a little bit early, right? Because especially if you don't really understand how the system works, and you know, being a governor or a legislator, you really have to be a jack of all trades, sort of a generalist, and you really can't, you know, I mean, I had the advantage of working with a governor who had worked in the criminal justice system as a prosecutor and was a policy wonk and was very knowledgeable about how all this stuff worked. And he would school me and Scott Semple about stuff sometimes, you know. But, you know, Governor Lamont doesn't have that specific background. But nonetheless, good outcomes have happened, right? I mean, we are, as I said, we're down more than almost any other place in the country, percentage-wise. And you know, which is great. They could have released more, and they could have released more people sooner, for sure. But, you know, the end result is there's a lot fewer people in prison. You know, it's an interesting problem, which we haven't even talked about yet. And I only found this out or realized it talking to some prosecutors and public defenders. You know, the court dockets right now in Connecticut, there's almost nobody going to court. Right. And that's been the case since March, right?
Right.
So there's this huge pent up number of cases that are just languishing because they can't get into court to resolve them. Mm-hmm. And the question is, at what point does this sort of tsunami of cases come barreling back into the courthouses? And when that happens, how are they going to be processed? Because the way that business has typically been done is you have I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, right? A long line of people in the courtroom waiting to talk to a prosecutor. When they talk to the prosecutor, like a foot away from the prosecutor's face, and they're looking at pieces of paper. You know, that's never going to happen again, at least not for a while. So how the hell is this going to actually happen? And so the next big decision for the criminal justice professionals is, how are we going to get rid of this backlog? And there is, you know, you could jettison a lot of cases where, you know, after all, if you got arrested 6 months ago for minor stuff and you haven't gotten into trouble since then, what is the point to drag it? You know, so I think this is going to be interesting to see how the people who are directly involved in this get through this whole.
But doesn't that mess with your, and the other part of that is, doesn't that mess with your rights as due process, right? Like, doesn't this call it, like, you have the right to have things resolved readily and speedily. Doesn't this COVID mess with that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so Connecticut has a speedy trial law, like most places do, but it really only applies if you're locked up pre-trial. If you're out on bail, it doesn't really apply to you.
So no one is locked up? Are you saying nobody's locked up?
No, I mean, no, I'm saying those people have a right to get into court, and they are getting into court. But that's like a small percentage of all the people who've got pending cases, you know?
Okay.
And I'm just saying, all these other people are relatively minor stuff. They're out on bond. They got arrested 6 months ago for like a breach of peace or something. You know, in almost every other part of the country, by the way, it's worth noting that prosecutors have to agree to take the cases before they get docketed into court. Here, every arrest gets a court date. And the charges are automatically generated on the court docket based on what the police say. The prosecutors don't even get involved, typically, unless it's a warrant arrest or something, until the person is in the courtroom standing in front of them and they're pulling out the file, looking at the charges and the police reports. That's the typical way this stuff gets done. And what I'm saying is, I think, again, necessity being the mother of invention, some sort of triage thing is going to have to be developed, because otherwise, you know, what would normally be 300 or 400 people coming to court on a typical day in New Haven is going to be like 800 or 900. Like, how this is not going to happen.
You better start doing it like
and that will have to
McDonald's.
go on for months. That will have to go on for months.
Yeah.
Even if they were doing it the traditional way, which they just can't. So there's some, you know, the decisions have been postponed. This can has been kicked down the road for since early March. And I'm just kind of very curious how the people whose job it is to figure this out figure it out.
See, Mike, this is why Babz and I we're buying up all the Jack in the Boxes that are going out of business, so that we can do arraignments by drive-through. Gonna be. You're speaking to the clown, you get arraigned.
I was talking to a judge the other day. I was speaking to a judge who's running one of these courthouses, one of these typically I won't say which one, but typically a really busy courthouse. And he was describing, he goes, when in the few cases they have, the judge is in the courtroom with the robe on and the whole bit.
Yeah.
He's the only one in the courtroom, right? With the mask on. The public defenders in the public defender's office, the prosecutors in the prosecutor's office, all remote on Zoom. The defendant is by himself or herself in another courtroom. And if there's a victim, the victim's in another courtroom. And it's like he described it as Hollywood Squares, and that's how they're doing the few cases that are able to get into court. Like, this is like crazy, right? This is not gonna play out over time. And so in this, just the same way the prison system had to manage this 6 months ago,
right?
Courts are a month or 2 or 3 away from trying to figure out how they triage all this stuff out. And I mean, if they let me make all the decisions, I could come up with a policy. It would make a lot of people angry, but still, there's no easy way out of this. And it'll be very interesting to see how they play it.
Wow.
So
that's a lot to unpack. I'm glad I'm not in that conversation. In that room.
Mike, it's been really wonderful having you back. I hope we can rely upon you for updates from time to time, and kind of, especially as this is, in some ways, I'm sure this is going to get crazier and crazier before it gets more structured. So we definitely need our friends to help us make sense out of it. So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. This was a good conversation. It was really good. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you guys for doing this. It's so important that these kinds of discussions take place. It really is. I mean, most people don't think about this stuff. So
that's wonderful.
Well, we do.
Mike, if people want to get in touch with you, what's your contact information?
So on Twitter, it's at Mike Lawler, L-O-R at the end, at Mike Lawler. And, my Facebook page, you can just search that on there. But at the University of New Haven, my email is mlawler@newhaven.edu. So that's, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat with anybody.
Thank you so much, Mike Lawler.
That's wonderful.
I appreciate you being our first guest back.
And how. So Babz, our next show is on September 18th. And we are going to have the wonderful Connecticut state legislator, Josh Elliott, on.
Okay.
And he's going to talk about what's going on up at the Capitol and the initiatives they're planning on for the next session. So that's going to be great. And that we cannot endorse him because he's running for Hamden, Connecticut representative. So he's on merely as a criminal justice guest, and because we love him, not because we endorse him. How's that for a non-endorsement?
All right.
It's beautiful.
That's good. So, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, for supporting us in season 4. Thank you, Mike Lawler. Say hello to David. And I hope your son enjoyed his first day of virtual school.
He's into it. Got up early.
Oh, all right. That's a good sign.
All right, Babz, season 4, number 1 under our belt.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. I enjoyed doing this with you.
Thank you,
Y'all
Babz.
have a good weekend.
All right. Love you, Babz.
Love you too. Peace and blessings, everybody.
See you later.
Thank you, Harry.